A young man was on a school trip. He was having fun, enjoying himself with friends. The bus had taken them to a small town. Now, when I say small town, you might imagine some underdeveloped, empty place. But it wasn't like that. It was actually a tourist spot. So, it wasn't exactly cheap or ugly. The locals were quite polite, people who made their living off tourism. As soon as they checked into the hotel, they went to the reception area to enjoy a big dinner. That's when the boy, chatting in the lobby with his friends, overheard something curious during a conversation with the receptionist. Apparently, there was a room on the top floor that was completely sealed off. No one was allowed in. What he heard next was a horrifying tale disguised as a simple anecdote. Every hotel has its own story, and something truly dark had happened in that room. That's why they'd locked it up. The incident had caused such a stir that even the two neighboring rooms, one on the left and one on the right, had been evacuated just to keep people away from that area. The hotel owner clearly didn't want anyone going near it. The receptionist, being young and kind-hearted, had warmed up to the boys and shared the story with them, though she begged them not to go anywhere near the place. "But what happened in there?" they asked. "I'd rather not talk about it," she replied. Nowadays, the young man explains that, at the time, he dismissed the girl's superstitions as typical of small towns. Just another ghost story for those who are sensitive to such things. He was from a big city, after all, and probably a bit more skeptical by nature. Still, the idea had taken root in his mind. He asked his friends to come with him to the top floor, but they were older and not interested. They told him to stop being childish, to grow up, and to join them in something more age-appropriate. But maybe due to his own immaturity, or simply because he was the kind of person who preferred a good story over a good party, he gathered his courage, took the elevator, and went up alone. As the elevator doors slid open in front of him, he instantly felt a wave of regret. The hallway was pitch dark, as if it were still under construction. The only sources of light were the elevator itself and a small window at the far end of the corridor through which the streetlights could be seen. He mustered up the courage, maybe because he had no girlfriend, didn't enjoy parties, and just didn't feel like he fit in. Many of you will know that feeling. So he thought, what else am I going to do? He wasn't about to go back down looking like a coward, so he walked down the hallway, searching for the room they'd mentioned, and he found it. He took out his phone and smartly used the flashlight to confirm the number. That was it. The room that was supposedly cursed, according to the receptionist's story. Convinced it was all just nonsense, he placed his hand on the door. It was cold, but nothing happened. So he knelt down, leaned his head toward the keyhole, and looked through it. You know what? The hotel had big windows, and the same streetlights that helped him see in the hallway dimly illuminated the inside of the room. He looked to the left. The place was filthy, not because it had been trashed, but because clearly no one had set foot in there for years. It was obvious, even in the dim light and heavy shadows. But then he looked to the right and saw a naked woman, sitting with her back against the wall, curled up in a ball. He could see her hair moving slowly, and she was gently rocking. He was terrified. He shot to his feet, accidentally made a noise, and ran down the hallway toward the elevator. When it finally arrived, after what felt like the longest 30 seconds of his life, he turned back. Though his panic had driven him to flee, he calmed slightly when he saw the woman hadn't followed him. In fact, the door hadn't even opened. To this day, he says he doesn't know how he did it. But he went back down the hall, praying no one would call the elevator from below so it would still be waiting for him with its helpful light. He got on his knees again and peeked through the keyhole once more. But this time, all he saw was red. A solid, overwhelming red. He could no longer see the bed, the bathroom door, the windows. Everything was engulfed in that color. Even the keyhole itself seemed stained with it. He can't describe much more because he only looked for about 3 seconds. He stood up again, afraid, not quite panicked, but seriously frightened, and began to move quickly down the hall. That fast-paced walk that isn't quite running, but faster than normal, when fear is creeping up behind you. He stepped into the elevator and went back down. Then he waited over 40 minutes for the receptionist who had told them the story to come back and relieve the other staff member. When she finally returned, he approached her and said, "I need to talk to you." "What happened?" she asked. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I went up there alone and did exactly what you told us not to do. And now I'm really scared." She looked at him with a mix of disappointment and understanding. The kind of look only a woman can give a man who's messed up and is genuinely afraid. "Why would you do that, you idiot? But please tell me what happened in that room." Without going into too much detail, she explained. A woman had been brutally murdered in that room. She'd been beaten with such cruelty, such hatred, that what had once been a human face was reduced to a mangled mess of flesh. It didn't even look like a woman anymore. And yet, what people remember most from the story was one final chilling detail about her body. Her eyes were completely red. A very young boy was in math class. He was bright, sharp, a good student. A bit shy, perhaps, but naturally kind and light-hearted. Someone who, despite his early maturity and brilliant mind, often went unnoticed. There were only 6 minutes left before class ended. He was bored, doodling in his notebook. The teacher wasn't saying anything he didn't already know. In that moment of distraction, he looked out the window. His desk was near the large classroom windows, and something caught his eye. On the grass, near a tree, there was a fold. A piece of paper. As soon as class was over, the boy grabbed his backpack and rushed outside, hoping no one else had spotted the mysterious object. He was lucky. He got to it first. He picked it up and saw that it was a folded photo. When he opened it, he found himself staring into the eyes of the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. About his age, long hair, stunning eyes, and holding up a peace sign with her left hand. The boy began to wonder. Reasonable questions filled his mind. Suddenly, he wasn't thinking about Pokemon, or Xbox, or PlayStation anymore. Not even the internet. The girl in the photo had taken over his every thought. The next day, with the photo still in hand, and clinging to the hope that he'd found it for a reason, especially since it was on school grounds, he started asking his classmates if they had seen her. Everyone said no. Driven by desperation, he even approached teachers he'd never spoken to outside of class. "Sir, do you know this girl? Ma'am, have you seen this girl before?" Each time, the answer was the same. No. The boy felt crushed. Maybe finding that picture had just been a meaningless coincidence after all. But that night, after spending most of the day thinking about the girl, he woke up in the middle of the night. Something had stirred him, giggling. The giggle of a little girl. Naturally, he was terrified. He stayed under the covers up to his mouth and didn't move. The next morning, he had a lot on his mind. It was impossible not to connect the dots, right? What had happened the night before, the girl in the photo, could it all be a coincidence? He didn't think so. The laughter was clearly that of a girl. His obsession outweighed everything else. Still holding the photo, he went and asked his sister, "Just a wild guess. Have you seen this girl before?" No. Then he went and knocked on neighbors' doors. "Have you seen this girl?" No. The search grew more and more hopeless, but he couldn't stop. He was obsessed. He was in love with the girl in the photo. It was a very sad day for him. So, he went to bed, and once again, in the middle of the night, the giggling woke him. The same girlish laughter. He thought again. Could it be her? He was still terrified, but maybe a little less than the night before. And this is the moment, the human crossroads, where fear and obsession clash, and obsession wins. The boy got out of bed and looked out the window. He didn't know exactly where the laughter was coming from, but one thing was clear. It was coming from outside. He peered out and heard it again. Louder this time. He decided to take a chance and face the unknown. He tiptoed downstairs so he wouldn't wake his parents. He unlocked the front door and stepped outside. The night air was cold. He heard the giggles again, now even louder, pulling him further away from the house, as if beckoning him. He followed the sound to the street, and in the street, headlights lit up his face. A car struck him. He died instantly. His body hit the windshield, then slammed to the ground, landing in a growing pool of blood. The driver, drunk, slammed the brakes. Heart pounding, he stumbled out of the car, dropped to his knees beside the boy, and took his hand to pull the photograph from his fingers. In his panic, he looked at the picture, and in that photo, the man saw a beautiful little girl holding up 3 fingers. This story begins and ends on a farm far from the big city. One of those places where life is quiet, but only because there are barely any people. So when you picture what I'm about to tell you, clear your mind of shops, shopping malls, stores, maybe even paved roads. This happened to a farmer. When people finally went to his house, years after he was presumed dead, because no body was ever found, it was nothing more than a filthy, crumbling wreck of a farmhouse. Broken windows, no doors, moldy wood, and black where there should have been white. Amid the dust and decay, they found a letter. To this day, no one knows whether this horrifying tale is true or just an urban legend, but those who tell it claim the myth began with the letter itself, so calling it fiction doesn't quite feel right. Because the paper was there. A cruel joke, perhaps, if you're willing to believe that a scrap of paper as old as the house itself, buried in dust, was left by some kid passing through, some prankster pulling a sick joke, inside the home of a man who vanished. The farmer's supposed letter read like this. Every afternoon, he stacked his hay bales near the horse stable. He harvested, bundled, and neatly arranged them, just as life in the open fields should be, stacked by the animals who fed on them. Until one day, he saw that someone had moved all the hay bales he had worked so hard to pile. Not stolen. No, that would have been better. More comforting, even. They hadn't been taken. They had been moved, about 20 meters away from his house, laid out on the ground, one by one, each separated by 10 or 15 meters. No longer stacked, just there. Arranged. The man was deeply disturbed. Confusion gave way to anger. Of course, he thought it had to be some kids playing a cruel prank. Furious, he slammed the door open, stormed down the stairs, and began dragging the bales back, one by one. They were large, not heavy, but big enough to make the task exhausting. He returned them exactly as they were before, right by the stable. He swore to himself that if he ever caught those kids, he'd drag them by the ears and make them confess, and maybe even march them back to their parents' house at gunpoint. But he didn't know then that he'd made a false promise to himself, because the next day, despite checking the windows multiple times before bed, the hay bales had moved again. This time, they were even farther, spread out across his land, each about 30 meters apart, trailing across his property in a loose line. Naturally, he assumed the same culprits were responsible, only now he was angrier than ever. Teenagers, idiots, little punks out to mess with him. Or so he thought. He spent the entire day dragging the hay back again. This time, he put the bales inside the horse stable and locked the doors with a padlock. Surely the brats wouldn't go as far as breaking a lock. That night, he tried to calm his nerves with a warm glass of milk. In the letter, he says he managed to relax a bit, took a bath, even fell asleep. But for some strange reason, he woke up before the sun rose. Farmers rise early, but this was even earlier than usual. And because his internal clock worked like a charm, again, he was a farmer, he knew something was off the moment his eyes opened. A heavy feeling crept over him. He was afraid of his own house in the dark. He grabbed his lamp, his shotgun, headed downstairs, walked to the hallway, eyes locked on the front door. He opened it, expecting to catch those pranksters red-handed, but there was nothing. What he did feel was the weight of the air, thick and strange. Holding the lamp, he stepped down onto the porch and noticed something. The stable door was wide open. The padlock was snapped. The chains lay in a heap on the ground. His heart pounded, rage flared in his chest. But that anger vanished instantly when he realized the horses were in a frenzy, screeching, reeling. One of them was dead. Beheaded. He didn't realize it at first, not when he saw the body, but when the blood-soaked hay touched his ankles. Thick. Sticky. Cold. One of his animals had been slaughtered brutally. And do you remember those hay bales? They were back, placed exactly where they had been before, lined up, forming a wide arc, a semicircle that wrapped around nearly the entire edge of his land. As the sun rose, he could see them stretching out like dark bricks in the distance, one here, one there, one farther out. The man nearly broke down in fear, and he didn't mind admitting it. He understood the message loud and clear. Whoever or whatever had been doing this didn't like its work being undone. So the poor man, terrified and too afraid to leave his land, for fear that the rest of his horses would be killed, and in those days, a farmer without animals was as good as dead, decided to stay. Shotgun in hand. The police were far away and he had no phone. You've surely gathered by now this happened a long time ago. That night he steeled himself, determined to stay awake. With a big jar of coffee by his side and his shotgun across his lap, he sat in his rocking chair, right outside his front door, watching the darkness. No streetlights, just the moon, his only friend. Midnight came. He wrote that it had been years since he'd stayed up so late. I remind you again, he was a farmer. Then, at 3 a.m., he saw it. He heard the rustle of bushes far, far off in the fields. Something moved. Something tall. He described it as a kind of giant mantis, slim, impossibly tall, maybe 4 meters high. It peered toward the house. He saw its eyes glinting like those of an animal. Terror bubbled inside him, boiling. He couldn't take it. He ran back inside, slammed the door, and broke down crying. Because he had shut it so hard, and now, whatever that thing was, it was probably already sprinting toward him. But thankfully, he was wrong. He peeked out the windows, but if the creature was still outside, he couldn't see it clearly. He said it looked hairless, skinless even, as if it had exposed muscle, like some raw, sinewy beast. Even so, he could never quite make out what it was. But that night, it had moved the hay again, to the edges of his property, walked to the stable, terrified the animals, removed even more bales, and, by morning, he realized it had circled his entire house, a hay bale at every point of the perimeter. It was only then, as daylight returned, that he found the courage to step outside, perhaps encouraged by the animals still in the stable, and that's when he saw it, hiding in the bushes, watching him. That's when he understood. He had become the pet of something monstrous. He tried the experiments. He let all his animals go, horses, pigs, chickens. They ran. Nothing stopped them. But when he tried to leave, he felt it, that thing drawing near, watching, ready. It wasn't after the animals. It wanted him, just as he feared. He was the pet of something unspeakable, and he wasn't sure his shotgun could stop something that had easily dragged and decapitated a horse. He ended the letter saying he was running out of supplies, that he didn't know what cruel god could curse someone with such a fate, but in his desperation, he had to try something. The final words of the letter were these: "I'm going to try to escape." He was never seen again. The man walked through the fog. He could hear his own footsteps, yet nothing appeared ahead of him. Still, he kept walking, step after step, without thinking, without reflecting. He was simply waiting, expectant. And he walked, until at last, emerging from the mist, stood a vast cavern, its entrance dark and cold. An entrance made just for him. And in that moment, he knew. He knew it with both reason and instinct. The time had come. Yes. This was it. This was what all the religions had spoken of. He had arrived at the gates of hell. He, a lonely, lost soul, understood that he had no choice. He had to go in. There was no alternative. He stepped inside the cavern. The darkness was suffocating. Something vile and pulsing awaited him deep within. He could feel it. The stench of rotting flesh was overwhelming. And then, a voice. It echoed from every pore of his being. A voice so immense, so terribly powerful, it said, "Welcome." The poor soul, the poor man, trembled. He was falling apart, barely holding himself together. His voice cracked, soaked in tears, as he whimpered, "Who are you?" The voice, piercing yet patient, replied, "You know who I am." And the man began to cry. "I don't understand. I don't understand why I'm here. Why? I lived a good life. I never harmed anyone. Why?" Then, after a long silence, the voice, calm and deep, asked him, "What did you expect?" He wiped away his tears, still sobbing, and pondered. "On Earth, they say your greatest trick, the cruelest lie you ever told humanity, was convincing them you didn't exist." But the voice corrected him. "No. The greatest trick I ever played on humanity was making them believe they had a choice." The man sobbed even harder. "You're the devil, right?" The voice corrected him one last time. "No. I am God."